Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching us on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. As always, it's much appreciated. You can go to Empire Media, YouTube page. That's AMPIRE. Thank you very much. All right, one last day. It's me and you. So we got some mini camp day 3 stuff to talk about. First of all, do me a favor. You can read my work on ESPN.com. I am going to go on vacation for a couple of weeks. I will continue to have a couple podcasts every week. I got some new podcasts coming up, including at least one special guest that I know you're going to enjoy hearing from probably in a week or in a week and a half or so. But there will be good stuff coming up. So make sure you tune in. But now let's get to what's going on out at Washington's practice facility. It was a very light practice. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about practice, but there are things happening out here that we need to talk about. After I was able to talk to some of the assistant coaches after practice today, a couple of things that I saw, a couple of things to sum up. But let's start with Terry McLaurin because I'm going to stay there. And I told you there was optimism. I told you yesterday that there was optimism regarding his contract. That is still the case. I still think this gets done before training camp. At what point? Could it be this week, next week, week after? I don't know yet. I do know there's optimism, and I do think it gets done before then. So we'll just stick with there. Now, the other guy along with that is Curtis Samuel. He did not practice full teamwork this week. Ron Rivera continues to say that was done out of an abundance of caution, that it's not related necessarily to the groin, that they want to make sure they feel like he had a good spring, and they want to get him to summer in one piece, make sure nothing else happened. He did feel some tightness in his body a few days ago, and that's why they wanted to make sure they limited him. I'll just say this. We'll see how it evolves in August and throughout the season as to whether or not this is a problem or not. I'm not going to tell you it's not because I don't know that. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to sell that. But I'm not going to also go overboard. I do know what happened last year. We all know what happened last year. To me, he's got to go out and prove that he's healthy, and we'll go from there. If he is healthy, I think he's going to be a big help, of course. And we did see him out there. When we saw him out there running, he was running pretty well. He ran better than we saw him last year. So that's a good sign. But as far as everything else, let's wait and see how this evolves. All right. So after talking to some of the assistant coaches, one of the things I want to talk about first is J.D. McKissic and his importance. And this came up when I asked Randy Jordan about Antonio Gibson and the difference that maybe he is seeing this spring because Gibson is trimmed down, lost about 6-7% body fat, and worked a lot more on his explosiveness. Now, you also know he worked on that last offseason, but I think reshaping his body will help that explosiveness. The drills, the footwork drills, he did some last offseason, he did some this offseason. But when I was talking to Randy Jordan about that, he brings up J.D. McKissic and his importance. And this is why, first of all, it's why they needed to keep him. Secondly, it's why I don't know why they even flirted with the idea of not bringing him back and making him a legitimate offer. Why they didn't do that in the first place, I still don't know, because they ran the risk of losing a guy who, to me, is an important part of that offense and in that locker room. And this is why. So for Antonio, for example, they would like to still see him evolve in the pass game in the NFL. And then we always know it comes up, but I still think they'd like to see whether or not he catches more balls. It's really about maybe in some cases the kind of routes he's going to run. So, for example, with J.D. McKissic in there, J.D. is the leader in that route. And so Antonio will listen a lot to what he has to say. And it's better when you have a player telling you this than really when it is the coach. That's when you know as a coach that you've got a good room, when you don't have to always be the voice saying, hey, you got to do this. It's also why I always felt and others felt like they should have had a veteran pass rusher for the young defensive ends in that group last year, because that's what they need to hear. They need a voice who can say, hey, Chase, Montez, this is what I would do, or this is how I did it, or maybe you could use this move, versus the coach telling you that. Dramatically different. With JD, he'll give Antonio feedback. They're different kind of guys. And JD is a lot twitchier, but with Antonio, he can look at him and say, they can run the same route, say, hey, this is how I would have done it. I would have run the route this way. Again, maybe differences in their game, but there are things they can learn and pick up from any kind of player. And another example, I was talking to Jahan Dotson after practice for a story way down the road. But one of the things he talked about is I asked him about like picking up things from other receivers. He even picked up things from Pat Freiermuth, who was a tight end at Penn State and a teammate. It's like, you have Dotson, who's a small guy. Freiermuth is a big tight end. But he said he noticed the way that he would box out receivers and how he could play tall. So he tried to incorporate some of that into his game. Maybe he already had it. Some of that is natural. But the point is, he felt like he learned from that. So I think going back to JD and Antonio, that's a reason why it was so important to have JD back, why they shouldn't have flirted with losing him, but also not just for Antonio, but for Brian Robinson's growth as well in the pass game, in addition to as a running back. Randy Jordan can help him a lot as a runner. And I told you some examples of things from yesterday where he would talk about the angles of how he needs to run, how he needs to make sure he keeps his shoulders low. I felt like that was a point of emphasis for Brian in this camp, because when I watch him, he wasn't always upright. I felt like he was leaning with his shoulders a little bit, which is what you're going to want to see from a taller running back. He's also Robinson also is a huge Adrian Peterson fan, has watched a lot of the tape, and Peterson was very much a straight up runner. He's so rare though that most guys, 99% of the guys can't get away with that. But again, that's the importance of JD McKissic, and again, why they shouldn't have flirted with losing him. All right, on to Benjamin St-Juste. So, they're playing him in the slot. And I asked Chris Harris about that, and Jack Del Rio talked about his footwork. So I asked him about, being a bigger corner playing in there. Why did they feel like he could do that? And he went back to his workouts before the draft where he ran the 3-cone drill. That's what this goes back to. That's the change of direction, the sudden change, etc. His 3-cone drill time was 6.63 seconds. He said anything under 7 is really good. So 6.63. That's one of the reasons why they started to toy with the idea of moving him inside or feeling like he could play inside, because he has that quick change of direction. By comparison, Derek Stingley, a phenomenal talent, phenomenal athlete and corner, ran the 3-cone in 7.0 seconds. Different corner, going to play outside, but if you're going to play inside, you better have the ability to move like that. The other thing was the length, and I've told you about that before, and I asked Harris about the importance of that length for a guy inside. And usually you're going to get a smaller corner inside there and you get caught up in traffic. You are going to have some run fit responsibilities. And if you have that size, you have a little bit better ability to take on some blockers and play and shed stuff in traffic. So that's one reason. And the second reason I think is a little bit obvious. If you're covering some smaller receivers, you do have that length. They've now got to throw over you, or maybe, and I saw this with Dotson a couple times against St-Juste, where maybe he's beaten a little bit, but that length helps him recover just a little bit more than he ordinarily would have. He's not a burner, so he may be more quick than he is fast, but I think that's why they wanted to try him inside. Again, the next step is let's see how he does in the preseason games, because he's going to play there, and then how he does in the games. But it's why they feel good about moving him inside.
Guys, are you looking for that extra confidence when it's time to have fun? Let me tell you about BlueChew.com. Blue Chew is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis, but in chewable form and at a fraction of the cost. Blue Chew's tablets help men combat all forms of ED. Blue Chew is also an online prescription service, so no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversations, and no waiting in line at the pharmacy. And it ships right to your door in a discreet package. The process is simple. Sign up at BlueChew.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. And the best part, all done online. Blue Chew's tablets, made in the United States, and they prepare and ship direct, so it's cheaper than a pharmacy. And here's a special deal for our listeners. Try Blue Chew free when you use our promo code KEIM at checkout. Just pay $5 shipping. That's BlueChew.com, promo code KEIM, K-E-I-M, to receive your first month free.
Dyami Brown. Listen, here's the other thing, folks. The spring is a time for optimism for every team. This team is no different. So everything you're going to hear right now is about why they think a guy could be good. Does it mean they're going to be that way? No, because every year you hear about guys who, if I went back and looked at what guys say in the spring and then how it plays out in the season, if I went and did that every year, you'd see a dramatic difference sometimes from the spring, the winter, the spring, and then in the season, because not everybody's going to play out that way. But you're looking for reasons why. Why could this guy be better? And they do have a lot of young guys that need to improve, one of which is Dyami Brown. So when I asked Drew Terrell about Dyami, one of the things he talked about is felt like you can see more confidence. With young guys growing, you're going to see a confidence change. And Dyami talked about the need to attack the ball more in the air, and that's what he felt he should do. I think one of the plays that I thought, or one of the routes I thought I'd see more of with Dyami last year were the slant routes. Before training camp last year, I was talking to a scout and said that they felt like Dyami would be really good on the slants. Like he didn't have any trouble going over the middle of the slants, and they felt like he'd be able to break some of those throws. Well, we didn't really see that, did we? But that's one of the, I have seen that a couple of times in the mini camp. But the other thing Terrell talked about was what he is seeing from him in the classroom, the kind of questions he's asking compared to last year, the kind of notes he's taking compared to last year. So I think all that stuff is partly why they say, okay, maybe this guy's starting to get it, because you see it here. Now the key is transferred out there. You got to now go make plays. And if he does that, you'll see the confidence continue to grow. But again, it's why they're going to enter camp feeling better about Dyami Brown than they did maybe where he was at in camp last year. So there you go. Speaking of Terrell, we did talk about Jahan Dotson for a minute. And it's funny because I asked him about it, and he said, well, he's very smooth, to the point that Terrell said that during rookie minicamp, he went up to Dotson and said, you got to run faster. You got to run faster. Well, the reality was he was running fast. It's just that he was doing it very smooth. So that's one of the things that has jumped out with them. But for them, with Dotson, really the spring, all it did is affirm the decision they made to draft him. All right, on to Carson Wentz. So Ken Zambezi said, the quarterback's coach, one of the things he talked about, I talked about with him, is he didn't want to judge Wentz. And this is smart. Like, I think any good coach is going to do this. You don't want to go in there with a preconceived idea of who this player is based on what you've heard in media reports or the gossip mill or whatever. You need to go in there with an open mind for any guy, because if you don't, I think it's going to lead to trouble. And that's what Zampese has done. He said that, he's not here to judge. He said, when you go to a new place, it's a good chance of time to reinvent yourself. And the other thing Zampese said I felt was interesting was not just that, but he followed up with, if I was having an issue somewhere, I would want to work hard on that when I go somewhere else, when I have a chance to reinvent myself, work hard on that particular issue. That is something that I think Wentz has talked a little bit about. And I think that'll be interesting to see how that develops with him, because with Wentz, some of the things you always heard was whether it's leadership in the locker room, more so relating to guys, being a little bit more open with guys, getting to know them a little bit better, because it's important for that, because when things start to go south, and they always do, whether it's for a game, a quarter, whatever, you want to have guys who are going to have your back. And the better relationship you have with them, the more they're going to come to your defense. And that, I think that all helps. Now, if you go out and play well, I mean, that's what helps. That's what helps too. The other thing that Zampese talked about is he felt like Wentz was in a really good place with his timing in the offense so far. And he said one of the things that he's liked throughout the spring is the way Wentz would go through his reads. You could see him going 1, 2, 3, 4 across the board. That's something that they really like. And speaking of the timing, and I brought up this play, I think it was yesterday or the day before, a throw to Cam Sims, if you remember, a little dig route where Sims basically turns, the ball's right on, and he drops it. So I wondered if that's like the part of the timing. And what that was, and I asked Drew Terrell about this one. So what happened there, he said, his receivers have to know, he said Carson was on time on that throw. But on the play, he said that Sims has to understand he was thinking about too many other things. He was worried about his footwork on the field, or if he felt like the field was a little bit slippery or something. He said, you got to get to your spot and get there, because the ball is going to be there. That's what these receivers have learned this offseason. I think that's something that Sims will clearly have learned off of that play. So I think I just wanted to revisit that since I brought it up the other day. The other key with Wentz will be how he handles adversity, because in the spring, if you're a veteran quarterback, you should look good. So let's keep that in mind. How do you handle adversity, whether, again, a game, a stretch of games, when things aren't going your way? How do you handle it? Wentz is very much a type A personality. And, one of the things that Rivera talked about is how hard he is on himself. So in practice, he said there were a lot of times where he'd hear Wentz talking. He turns around, he's like, but he's not talking to anybody. He's mumbling to himself about things he could have done better on that particular play and how he could have made a better decision or made a better throw or whatever. Knowing that, I think that's all good. You want guys who are hard on themselves and critique their own game, but you don't want guys who are going to let that linger. So how he handles that will be a big key for what kind of success he has this season. The other thing Zampese said with him is that it's evident that Wentz is, quote, very hungry. So we'll see. But if he is, then I think he will have worked on a lot of things that people said he needed to work on, or at least that he feels he needs to work on. Doesn't mean he has to agree with what everybody else says, but there certainly are parts of his game that he has to improve. Also, I'm going to go back to the field because the last play of the practice of the spring was a tip pass that Derek Forrest intercepted and returned the length of the field. Probably would have been about a 60 or 70-yard touchdown. There's a minute and 20 left in the drill, but it was a play that they decided, let's end on this one. The horn goes off, and they're out for the summer. With that, I think we have to look at, I'm going to get into some podcasts next week. I'm going to have Bram Weinstein on. Sam Fortier is going to be on next week. And we're going to discuss a lot of what with the offseason and going into training camp, the assessment of where this team is at. I think there are some good things to build on. I think you look at this offense and you feel like if things come together, if Curtis Samuel stays healthy, if Wentz really kind of gets a hold of this offense, you look at that. I think Antonio Gibson, I always think he can have a good year because I think he's got a lot of talent. And so you can look at that offense and say, there's potential for it to be a good offense. How good? I don't know. I'm not going to go crazy yet. I like Dotson. I like McLaurin. I like what Cam Sims offers here. I like Curtis Samuel, again, if he's healthy. But you got to get Logan Thomas out there, too. I think they're really thin at tight end in terms of experience without Logan Thomas out there. What are you going to do if it's Bates and then Cole Turner? And then what? Because Logan Thomas might not be out there for the first couple weeks. We don't know yet. So that's, so there's a good and a bad with that offense. And I think there's reason for optimism. And there are some things you say, okay, got to see how this evolves. Is the starting line, going to be as good or better than last year? Or where's it going to be in comparison? I always like the depth, but now they have two new guards. How is that going to play out? And you have a center who's coming off his own injury. How does that play out? That's a lot to ask. Like, you always hear about communication is key. Chase Rouillet hasn't been on the field with Andrew Norwell or Trey Turner. Now he's been in meetings. He's talked to them. He's getting to know them. That helps because you need a good relationship. How does that play out? That's another thing we say, okay, reason for optimism, reason for pause. Defensively, I'll just say this. I think I may have told you this the other day. I was going through the 53-man roster. We have to do this little project for ESPN. And I had a hard time. I'm looking at some of the secondary, the depth at corner, not a lot of proven depth. And the depth at safety, not a lot of proven depth. And then a linebacker, so how is Jamin Davis growing? I know they talked about him being confident, but I also heard he still has a ways to go. So what kind of impact will he make? Cole Holcomb, I feel good about him. But then after him, like, there are questions. Khalid Hudson and David Mayo, they're good are they good backups? I think so. But what level? I still think they're going to sign a veteran who has experience in this defense to at least help in the meeting room and just a guy who's ready to go in case he's needed. And then when does Chase Young come back? What level of play is he at when he does come back? I've consistently heard they're not going to rush him back. They've said it publicly. I've heard it privately from his own people who they're not putting any sort of all in for week one mantras out there because they want him back when he's ready and when he can make when he has the ability to make the proper impact. All questions that with most of these teams in the NFL in that 7 to 10 win range, they're all going to have questions. This team is no different. And that's why, we're going to end the spring looking at all this stuff, getting ready for training camp when a lot of those questions will start to be answered. With that, I hope you enjoyed our 3-day mini camp coverage. I'll be back on Monday with my pal, Bram Weinstein. There you go. Talk to you next time.